Peace Agreement of 1999 and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission TRC report 2002 is at the helm of monitoring and managing human rights issues within Sierra Leone. The overarching mandate of the Commission is to protect and promote the human rights of all in Sierra Leone. Every year, it produces and presents a report to the President on the state of human rights in Sierra Leone, which is subsequently laid in Parliament. Sierra Leone is a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Convention on Civic and Political Rights, ICCPR, both of which commit governments to uphold the right to free expression. Additionally, Section 25 of the 1991 Constitution of Sierra Leone guarantees press freedom and freedom of expression. President Julius Maada Bio signed the amended Public Order Act 1965, which effectively repeals the 55-year-old seditious libel section that criminalized free speech. What had for decades seemed impossible for the media and journalism in Sierra Leone was made a reality when, on October 28, 2021, the President officially assented the new law that repealed criminal libel. Sierra Leone became the 23rd African country and the 110th worldwide to abolish capital punishment. Under the new law, execution is replaced with life imprisonment or a minimum 30-year jail term for crimes such as murder or mutiny. 94 people were living under death sentence at the end of 2020. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the government of Sierra Leone continues its efforts and commitment to human capital development. The government has maintained its 21% budgetary allocation to the education sector generally. There is progressive increase in the enrollment rate of PPAs in government and government-assisted schools. Even though still challenged, government continues to provide teaching and learning materials in schools as part of the free quality education package. Parliament on 28 October 2021 passed into law an act titled the Sierra Leone Students Loan Scheme Act 2021. This act aims at facilitating and enhancing access to funds to support tertiary education. Government has made some progress in promoting the enjoyment of labor rights. The National Social Security and Insurance Trust, NASIT, division of the High Court of Sierra Leone, which was established in December 2019, commenced sittings in January 2021 in Freetown to adjudicate on matters related to pensioners, NASIT beneficiaries. Access to clean and safe water continues to be a challenge for most communities, particularly during the dry season. 4, health situation with emphasis on the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, Sierra Leone has made tremendous progress in key health outcomes. Health outcomes have seen some improvement, but in comparison to peer countries, our country is either equal or slightly trailing other member states in the region. Following the declaration of COVID-19 as a world pandemic by the World Health Organization, WHO, the government of Sierra Leone, as we informed you in one of our earlier reports, promptly took appropriate measures to prevent the virus even prior to the detection of the country's index case. Government introduced a series of regulations and policies, all aimed at preventing it from reaching the shores of Sierra Leone. Despite these measures, our country recorded its first case on 31st March 2020. This resulted in the establishment of additional measures by government to manage the cases, while at the same time continuing to enforce adherence to existing measures. The government of Sierra Leone, through the Ministry of Health and Sanitation, MOHS, received a financial grant from the World Bank for implementation of the Sierra Leone COVID-19 Emergency Preparedness and Response Project, SLCEPRP. The Sierra Leone COVID-19 Preparedness and Response Project aims at strengthening Sierra Leone's capacity to prevent, detect, and respond to the threat posed by COVID-19 outbreak. Sierra Leone now seeks the approval of the World Bank's Board of Executive Directors to provide a grant in the sum of $5 million US equivalent from IDA and $3.5 million equivalent from the Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Trust Fund, HEPRTF. The additional financing AF would support the cost of expanding activities of Sierra Leone COVID-19 Emergency Preparedness and Response Project, P173803, under the COVID-19 Strategic Preparedness and Response Program, SPRP, using the multi-phase programmatic approach approved by the board on April 2, 2020, and the vaccines AF to the SPRP approved on October 13, 2020. The primary objectives of the AF are to enable affordable and equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines and help ensure effective vaccine deployment in Sierra Leone throughout vaccination system strengthening, and to further strengthen preparedness and response activities under the parent project. Critically, the additional financing seeks to enable the acquisition of vaccines from a range of sources to support Sierra Leone's objective to have a portfolio of options to access vaccines under the right conditions of value for money regulatory approvals and delivery time, among other key features. The COVAX facility has put in place a framework that will anchor Sierra Leone's strategy and access to vaccines. Since October 30, 2020, the government of Sierra Leone has entered into an agreement with COVAX to undertake necessary actions so that Sierra Leone could receive COVAX-supported vaccines. The COVAX facility has agreed to provide vaccines for up to 20% of the total population. On March 8, 2021, the first batch of 96,000 doses of Covishield AstraZeneca arrived in the country, and the COVID-19 vaccination campaign has commenced since March 15, 2021. The World Bank's support for the country's additional doses of COVID-19 vaccine shall be prioritized to source through COVAX and to also support the country in accessing vaccines beyond COVAX as necessary. Given the various interventions made so far, the country has made enormous improvement. For instance, as of November 15, 2021, Sierra Leone reports 3,396 cumulative COVID-19 cases. There were 121 deaths with the case fatality rate of 2.0%. Males, 55% are more infected than females, 41%. While the median age of all cases is 34 years old, those above 45 years of age are disproportionately affected, consisting of 71% of all cases. The average age of COVID-19 deaths is 61.5 years, and CFR among those above 60 years old is significantly higher, 12.7%, than other age groups. 5. Status of the implementation of community texts and protocols. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, Sierra Leone has made progress in the implementation of the following regional integration programs within the framework of the ECOWAS Single Currency Roadmap. ECOWAS Trade Liberalization Scheme, ETLS. The authorities continue to implement this scheme. The National Approvals Committee, NAC, meets periodically with ETLS accredited enterprises to get their feedbacks on the implementation and to know if they face any challenge. However, the NAC could not carry out field visits to enterprises as required by the protocol due to financial constraints. During the period under review, a total of 37 companies have been registered under the scheme, of which 4 companies are still active and are exporting 3 products: ethanol, vegetable oil, and juice. Sensitizing and trainings are carried out regularly as required by law. ECOWAS Common External Tariff, CET. Significant progress was achieved in the implementation of the CET, following the operationalization and migration from ASECUDA++ to ASECUDA World Sierra Leone adopted 152 of the 177 ECOWAS 177 CED tariff lines. Sierra Leone was one of the countries that we are yet to migrate from CET HS 2012 to CET HS 2017. Though the establishment of National Tariff Committee had been sanctioned by the Finance Act 2020 as required by the ECOWAS CET regulations, the committee is yet to be made operational. ECOWAS National Coordination Committee, NCC. The National Coordinating Committee, NCC Secretariat, remained operational under the supervision of the NCC chairman and macroeconomist. Major stakeholders of the NCC, including the Ministry of Finance, Bank of Sierra Leone, Statistics Sierra Leone, and the National Revenue Authority, meet regularly to review and validate the draft macroeconomic convergence report of the country, compiled by the macroeconomist. Work on the macroeconomic convergence report for the first half of 2021 is almost completed. 5.2 Performance and the macroeconomic convergence criteria. Policy trust and macroeconomic and financial sector development. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the macroeconomic policy trust for 2021 focused on restoring fiscal and debt sustainability while addressing critical spending needs to continue to protect livelihoods. Monetary policy continues to focus on supporting the government economic recovery plan while mindful of the inflation objective. In addition, monetary policy focused on strengthening the country's resilience to external shocks through the accumulation of reserve buffers. Development in the real sector. Preliminary estimates suggest that economic activity demonstrated signs of recovery in 2021 relative to 2020. All the three sectors, that is agriculture and forestry, industry, and services, are projected to improve growth prospects. Real GDP growth is projected to rebound to 3.2% in 2021 from a contraction of 2.2% in 2020. Mining is expected to drive the recovery in 2021 on the back of normalization of production at the existing mines and improvement in international commodity prices. The improvement is expected to be supported by higher public investment, infrastructure, recovery in global demand for primary exports, as well as increased inflows of foreign direct investment. Non-food inflation dampened to 4.5% in the first half of 2021 from 12.3% in the corresponding period of 2020, whilst food inflation inched to 17.1% from 16.9% at the end of June 2020. Annual average inflation is projected to dampen to 10.7% by end of December 2020, driven largely by an increase in domestic food supply as we enter the harvest season. Development in the fiscal sector. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, fiscal pressures continued in the first half of 2021, reflecting a more than proportionate increase in government expenditures relative to revenues. Consequently, both the fiscal deficit and primary balance deteriorated during the review period. The overall fiscal deficit on commitment basis, including grants, increased to 2.1 trillion leones, 9.0% of GDP, from 1.4 trillion, 7.6% of GDP in the corresponding period of 2020. Similarly, fiscal deficit, including grants, was 2.8 trillion leones, 11.8% of GDP, relative to the 1.9 trillion leones, 10.0% of GDP, recorded at the end of June 2020. Similarly, Mr. Speaker, the primary balance deteriorated to 1.2 trillion, 5.0% of GDP, from 0.7 trillion, 3.7% of GDP in the first half of 2020. During the period under review, the deficit was largely financed from domestic resources, strengthening revenue mobilization, containing current spending, improving the efficiency of public investment, and expected inflows from development partners are expected to create fiscal space and ease pressure on the budget in the near term. Total domestic revenue improved to 3.4 trillion, 14.4% of GDP, from 2.7 trillion, 14.7% of GDP in the first half of 2020, explained by improved tax compliance and administrative reform. Tax revenue amounted to 2.6 trillion leons, 11.0% of GDP, compared to 2.0 trillion leons, 10.8% of GDP in the first half of 2020, on account of the improved tax compliance and other administrative reforms. Moreover, non-tax revenue increased to 0.79 trillion relative to 0.66 trillion leons collected during the same period a year ago, explained by improved receipts from timber export levy, road maintenance fund, marine resources, and other receipts from court fines. Total grants received increased to 0.66 trillion leons, 2.8% of GDP during the period under review, as against 0.44 trillion leons, 2.3% of GDP recorded at the end of June 2020, reflecting increased disbursements in budgetary support from development partners. Total expenditure and net lending amounted to 6.1 trillion leons, 26.0% of GDP in the first half of 2021, compared to 4.5 trillion leons, 24.3% of GDP recorded at the end of June 2020. On the back of increased recurrent and capital expenditure to support economic recovery, recurrent expenditure stood at 4.2 trillion, 17.8% of GDP during the review period, compared to 3.6 trillion, 19.4% of GDP for the corresponding period of 2020. Expenditure on goods and services, subsidies and transfers increased to 1.6 trillion from 1.4 trillion leons for the same period in 2020. This development was occasioned by transfers in respect of the free quality education program. Moreover, expenditure on wages and salaries increased to 1.8 trillion leons, 54.5% of domestic revenue, from 1.6 trillion leons, 59.3% of domestic revenue, owing to the creation of new institutions and the recruitment and improved conditions of service of staff in the civil service. Total interest repayments on government debt increased to 0.72 trillion leons, 21.2% of domestic revenue during the review period, compared to 0.61 trillion, 22.8% of domestic revenue for the corresponding period of 2020. Domestic interest payments represented 93.1% of total interest payment during the period under review, while external interest payment accounted for the rest. The shock of external debt dropped because government benefited from the debt service suspension initiative of the G20. Capital expenditure increased to 1.9 trillion, 8.1% of GDP at the end of June 2021, compared to 0.9 trillion, 4.9% of GDP in the first half of 2020, due to a surge in domestically financed capital expenditure. Domestically financed capital expenditure rose to 4.3% from 2.0% of GDP at the end of June 2020. Foreign financed capital expenditure increased to 3.8% of GDP from 3.0% in the corresponding period of the year. The proportion of recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure in total expenditure stood at 67.8% and 31.3% during the review period, from 79.7% and 20.3% respectively. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the stock of public debt stood at 32.2 trillion as at end of June 2021, compared to 28.4 trillion leons as at end of June 2020. The increase in the stock for the first half of 2021 was driven by new domestic borrowings to implement the national budget and new external loan disbursements to finance development. The reclassification of legacy arrears to bonds also added up to the stock of domestic debt. Relative to GDP, Public debt decreased to 68.4% from 46.2% in the corresponding period of 2020. Domestic debt increased to 11.8 trillion compared to 10.2 trillion recorded in the corresponding period of 2020. The increase was mainly in respect of new issuance of treasury bills to finance the budget. Ways and means advances to the government increased during the period, but the stock of arrears declined. The proportion of external debt to public debt was 63.3%, whilst domestic debt was 36.7%. Development in the monetary sector. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, monetary policy during the first half of 2021 continues to focus on containing inflationary pressures, strengthening the country's resilience to external shocks while mindful of the impact of COVID-19 on the economy. The monetary policy rate, MPR, was reduced by 100 basis points to 14.0% at end of June 2021 compared to corresponding period in 2020, signaling an expansionary monetary policy stance. However, relative to end of December 2020, the MPR remained unchanged at 14.0%. The weighted average interbank interest rate decreased to 14.45% during the period under review from 17.73% at end of June 2020, but remained within the interest rate corridor. Commercial banks' average savings deposit and lending rates respectively decreased to 2.23% and 19.88% from 2.9% and 20.51% in the corresponding period of 2020. In the money market, the 182 days and 364 days Treasury bill rates respectively decreased to 9.61% and 21.59% respectively. However, at end of June 2021, there were no transactions in the 91 days Treasury bills window, implying investors' increased appetite in the long end of the market. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, trends in monetary aggregate were expansionary at end of June 2021 as both broad money and reserve money increased. Broad money grew by 32.1% during the period, compared to 20.4% recorded in the corresponding period of 2020. The increase was driven by improvements in the net domestic assets and net foreign assets of the banking system during the period. The NDA increased by 37.3% as at end of June 2021 compared to 25.7% in the first half of 2020, primarily due to increases in claims on government and claims on the private sector. Net claims on government and claims on private sector grew by 27.5% and 11.1% respectively at the end of June 2021, compared to the growth of 40.2% and 10.5% at end of June 2020. The increase in the net claims on government could be attributed to government borrowing in the money market to finance economic recovery. Growth in private sector credit could be explained by the creation of special credit facility by the Bank of Sierra Leone to fund the market for essential goods and services. Also, net foreign assets increased by 16.9% at end June 2021, compared to 7.1% growth recorded in the corresponding period of 2020. This was attributed to the increased foreign assets of other depository corporations during the period. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, on year-on-year basis, reserve money grew by 10.8% at end of June 2021, compared to a growth of 55.5% recorded in the previous review period. The growth in reserve money was mainly emanated from increase in the net domestic assets NDA of the central bank. The NDA of the central bank grew by 24.8%, whilst NFA significantly reduced by 84.3%. On the liability side, expansion in reserve money predominantly reflected increase in currency circulating outside the banking system, which grew by 36.7% at end of June 2021, relative to a growth of 29.6% recorded in the corresponding period. The large growth in currency outside banks may reflect the growth of the non-bank sector. The growth in narrow money MI surged by 38.5% in the first half of 2021 on account of an expansion in both demand deposit and currency in circulation. Also, quasi-money grew by 26.1% compared to 13.2% growth recorded in the corresponding period of 2020, occasioned by growth of 28.2% and 24.5% in foreign currency deposits and time and savings deposits, respectively, with denomination of the Lyon. On 11th August 2021, the governor of the Bank of Sierra Leone issued a circular pursuant to Section 30 of the Bank of Sierra Leone Act 2019 to inform the public that the country's legal tender, the Lyon, shall be redenominated by the removal of the 3 last zeros from the face value of the said legal tender, and that the current legal tender shall continue to remain in force until such time and date that the Bank of Sierra Leone shall, by public notice, designate. The redenomination basically seeks to eliminate the effects of hyperinflation, simplify accounting records, and ease of expressing monetary values, reintroduce the use of coins, reduce cost of carrying large volumes of banknotes and its associated risks, improve efficiency in payment systems such as the use of ATM, etc. Development in the external sector. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, external sector performance is expected to deteriorate by the end of 2021, owing largely to the deficit in the current account. Current account deficit is expected to narrow to $673.1 million US, 14.9% of GDP in 2021, compared to $702.8 million US, 18.6% of GDP in 2020, reflecting a reduction in the deficit in the trade balance during the period. Merchandise trade deficit is expected to improve by 23.2% to $611.2 million US, 13.5% of GDP in 2021, from $797.6 million US, 21.1% of GDP in 2020, due to projected growth in export earnings and decline in import payments. Export receipts are projected to increase to $694.9 million US, 15.3% of GDP in 2021, from $423.5 million US, 11.2% of GDP in 2020, mainly on account of increased agricultural exports and resumption of iron ore mining during the year. Total imports are expected to surge to $1,306.1 million US, 28.8% of GDP, from $1,221.5 million US, 32.3% of GDP, which is largely explained by projected increase in import competing goods, especially in the manufacturing and agricultural sectors, to support economic recovery. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, current transfers are expected to decline by 19.9% of $350.6 million US, 17.7% of GDP in 2021, from $437.7 million US, 11.6% of GDP in 2020, occasioned by an estimated decline in both official and private transfers. The capital account balance is expected to grow by 32.1% of $115.6 million, 2.6% of GDP in 2021 compared to $87.5 million, 2.3% of GDP in 2020. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, transactions in the financial account balance is expected to record a net incurrence of liabilities of $419.8 million, 9.3% of GDP in 2020, largely on account of an expected growth in direct and other investment inflows. Consequently, the overall balance would worsen to a deficit of $137.8 million, 3.0% of GDP in 2021, from a surplus of $4.5 million, 0.1% of GDP in 2021, on account of development in the current account. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, gross international reserves increased to $695.0 million, 4.6 months of imports at the end of June 2021, from $653.8 million, 3.8 months of imports in the corresponding period of 2020, reflecting the substantial foreign exchange inflows from development partners to key sectors such as health, education, and social protection. As a result, the Leone remained relatively stable, depreciating against the WAUA by 3.0% at end of June 2021, relative to the depreciation of 3.9% at the end of June 2020. Compared to end of June 2020, the Leone depreciated by 4.6%. Status of performance on the microeconomic convergence criteria. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the country's performance on the primary convergence criteria improved during the period under review, as Sierra Leone met 2 out of 4 primary convergence criteria. Central bank financing of the fiscal deficit as a percentage of the previous year's tax revenue and gross external reserves in months of imports criteria were satisfied. The country did not meet the inflation and the fiscal deficit criteria. With respect to the secondary convergence criteria, the country met both the public debt to GDP and the nominal exchange variation criteria in the first half of 2021, as shown in the tables below. Medium-term outlook 2021 to 2024. Real GDP growth in 2021 is projected at 3.2% and to average 5.1% over the medium term. The real GDP growth in the medium term is anticipated to be supported by resumption of iron ore mining, higher public investment in infrastructure, recovery in global demand for primary exports, as well as increased inflows of foreign direct investments. Non-iron ore GDP is projected to grow by 3.1% and 4.9% between 2020 and 2024, respectively. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, agriculture, services, and improvement in energy are expected to drive non-iron ore GDP in the medium term. However, there are risks to the outlook which may include, for instance, unexpected global shifts in the COVID-19 pandemic, availability of vaccines, uncertainties in the mining sector, lower than expected support from development partners, or slower than expected reform implementation. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, inflationary pressures are anticipated to moderate over the medium term. Inflation is expected to moderate to 10.7% by the end of 2021 and eventually dropping to 11.5% 2024 and 10.3% in 2023 and 2024 respectively. The decline in inflation over the medium term is expected to be driven by exchange rate stability, increased domestic food production, prudent fiscal policy measures, and a proactive monetary policy stance. Domestic revenue is projected to increase, though marginally, from 14.1% of GDP in 2021 to 14.7% of GDP in 2024. Total expenditure and net lending are expected to decrease to 20.3% of GDP in 2024 from 23.1% in 2021. As a result, the budget deficit is expected to average around 2.0% of GDP by 2024. The protocol relating to community levy. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the disruptions to the global value chains and social distancing measures emanating from the COVID-19 pandemic has further heightened the durability of the external sector of the economy. However, the current account is projected to moderately improve over the medium term with an increase in mining and agricultural exports. Hence, gross international reserves in 2021 and over the medium term is anticipated to cover at least 3 months of imports. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, despite the effects of COVID-19, Sierra Leone has continued to meet her obligation under the Community Levy Protocol. As at 30th October 2021, Sierra Leone has paid the sum of 13 billion 622 million 194,101.5 and 58 cents, which is about 1,235,606 United States dollars. The protocol on the free movement of persons and goods. The country remains committed to the implementation of the ECOWAS protocol on free movement of goods, persons, and right of establishment. Rules relating to the setting up and operations of businesses continue to be applied equally to nationals and community citizens. However, the country is yet to commence issuance of the ECOWAS biometric identity card, and multiple checkpoints persist along the border posts. The Supplementary Act on Equality of Rights between Women and Men for Sustainable Development in ECOWAS region. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the government of Sierra Leone is committed to the achievement of gender equality and women's empowerment. The government and people of Sierra Leone continue to make steady progress in the advancement of women and girls as highlighted in the Supplementary Act and other international and regional human rights instruments. The Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs is the national machinery responsible for promoting gender equality and women's empowerment in Sierra Leone. Government has demonstrated commitment to the implementation of the Act through the development of policies, plans, promulgation of legislations, and ratification of treaties and conventions for the protection, welfare, and the advancement of women and girls in Sierra Leone. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the launch of the Hands Off Our Girls campaign by the First Lady of Sierra Leone was a step in the right direction to protect women and girls. The main objective of the campaign is to increase awareness of the hazards of early marriage, rape, and violence perpetrated against women and girls in the country. As stated earlier, government, in a bid to promote gender empowerment, has introduced a bill that will ensure that at least 30% of appointive and elective positions are held by women. Environment and climate change. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, Sierra Leone is richly endowed with natural resources, including forests, wildlife, fisheries, land and minerals. The climate is characterized by two distinct seasons: the rainy season, which runs from May to November, and the dry season from December to May. The average temperature is 26 degrees Celsius and varies from about 24 degrees Celsius to 28 degrees Celsius throughout the year. Sierra Leone, like many developing countries, is faced with environment and climate change-related challenges. The country is faced with loss of biodiversity and land degradation due to deforestation, logging, increased demand for firewood and charcoal, sand mining along the coastal areas, artisanal and industrial mining, wild bushfires, climate variability and change. Urban environmental degradation is on an increase as a result of the increased urban migration, demand for housing, illegal settlement, and unauthorized development. Consumption and production patterns, improper waste management and sanitation practices, as well as industry and transport-related pollution, which have adverse effects on the health of the urban population. The consequences of climate change and environmental degradation are felt in terms of decreasing air and water quality, dwindling agricultural productivity, unstable weather and climate conditions, which create human ill health and make livelihood management more difficult and could exacerbate poverty due to loss of livelihoods, property, and social infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the government of Sierra Leone has committed itself to environmental protection and sustainable utilization of its natural resources. This is manifested in Cluster 7 of the Medium-Term National Development Plan 2019 to 2023, addressing vulnerabilities and building resilience consistent with global targets set out in the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and the Country Policy and Institutional Assessment, CPIA, framework of the World Bank. In addition, government has waived GST on liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, and is removing import duty on same to reduce deforestation through the cutting down of trees for firewood and charcoal. These interventions are expected to reduce the price of cooking gas, which will make it more affordable. Furthermore, to support afforestation and reforestation, government has launched the National Tree Planting Project aimed at planting a minimum of 5 million trees, which contributes to global efforts to reducing the emission of greenhouse gases. Conclusion. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, we would have done injustice to our country if we conclude without informing this House that Sierra Leone continues its impressive performance in the Millennium Challenge Corporation MCC scorecard after its sustained consecutive passes between 2019 and 2020. MCC, the U.S. Foreign Assistance Agency, seeks to reduce poverty in developing countries through supporting development programs. This is the first time in the history of Sierra Leone. This is the first time in the history of Sierra Leone's engagement with the MCC process that it has had back-to-back passing scorecards. In 2019, Sierra Leone passed the 2020 financial year scorecard with 11 indicators, securing an additional 2 indicators, that is immunization and inflation. In this year's 2021 financial year scorecard, in the case of control of corruption, Sierra Leone has passed this indicator for the past 3 years and has also improved each year. The policies measured on MCC's scorecard, including immunization rates, inflation, and control of corruption, directly impact the well-being of citizens and the health of the economy. Finally, Mr. Speaker and honorable members, The Sierra Leone delegation wishes to reiterate the commitment of our country towards upholding and promoting issues that affect our community. We will continue to work as a nation to build and strengthen partnerships with our compatriots to ensure that the community achieves the wishes and aspirations of the founders to achieve the fundamental objectives for the formation of the community of states in our region. I thank you for your attention. Merci beaucoup. Obrigado.
Thank you very much. The general debate is now open. MPs who wish to intervene are invited to register on the intervention list.
Disanyumu. Mahama Ayarga.
Honorable Sawadogo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Right Honorable Speaker. I had a few issues of clarification to raise with regard to the electoral census. I thought I noticed that there were some difficulties, so I just want to know where we stand with this. In other words, what I'm asking of the delegation is for them to shed more light on that census, electoral census, and the type of challenges that you confronted. The second aspect is that at the extraordinary session which held in Winneba, I was very much impressed, I should say, by a DG, or rather the police inspector, Inspector General of Police, by his the kind of positions he took. I just wanted to know if you have the same Inspector General of Police in place. Indeed, as far as human rights are concerned, I was not very reassured by his statements. Thirdly, I would like to congratulate Sierra Leone, and this, there is a bill. There's a bill to promote women's interests for 30% for elected position and another percentage for appointments. This is progress. The demands from women is for them to be part of the decision-making processes. But I think what is lacking is even their very presence within the parties' governing bodies. I'm one of the people who have always felt that with the appointments, with appointed positions, women would be able to fulfill the conditions better in order to run for elections and win. Well, you are doing both, which is a good thing, and therefore I want to commend you for women's promotion of women's welfare interests. Well, they're called upon increasingly to lead our countries because we have more women. And with education, we'll see that there are more women going to school, So obviously, when it comes to decision-making bodies, it's only obvious that we will find them more there. To recap, I would say that I want to commend you for the effort you're making in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Honorable Numu.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Right Honorable Speaker. First of all, I would like to congratulate the delegation from Sierra Leone for that quality report. I am not an economist, but there was a lot of figures in your report. And from the figures, we have the impression that there's growth and there's improvement. So my question is this. Is there a positive impact on the lives of households? This is not highlighted in the report. In your conclusion, what you're saying, and this is on page 20, you state that inflation, that there is an impact on the well-being of citizens, also on the economy, the health. But you don't clearly state that the population has had some improvements, has seen improvements in its purchasing power, is that their living conditions, environmental conditions have improved. So this is what I wanted to know from the delegation, the Sierra Leonean delegation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ayerga.
Thank you very much, Right Honorable Speaker. Let me join colleagues to commend the Sierra Leonean delegation for an elaborate presentation on the developments in Sierra Leone in the past 1 year. The progress made in Sierra Leone is definitely commendable across all sectors, as is clearly illustrated in the reports. And I think we in the sub-region can only continue to encourage Sierra Leone to continue to make great strides in establishing itself as a good example in the Mano River Union area. Mr. Speaker, if we move away from the broad issues to the specifics, I will focus on just one area, which is the report relating to the security situation. And there's a clear indication that security-wise, everything looks okay. And those of us who are frequent travelers to Sierra Leone can confirm that you have an impressive security situation. Except, of course, the reference to illicit drugs, which is a major problem in relation to the youth of the sub-region, and not just in Sierra Leone alone. And I just want to find out what deepened efforts are being made to deal with the menace of illicit drugs, not just its trade, but also its use among the youth of Sierra Leone and, by necessary extension, the youth of the sub-region. I also didn't see much discussion about one major threat to peace and stability in the sub-region, which is youth unemployment. What steps are being taken to monitor and appreciate the extent of youth unemployment in Sierra Leone, and what measures are being taken to create more jobs for the youth in Sierra Leone. I also looked at your expenditure on the educational sector, which you say is about 21% of your GDP. That is impressive. Across the sub-region, a lot of money is going into education, but one key area is technical and vocational education. I know that you have a new policy of free senior high school education, and you have a policy of 100% access to basic education. And I know about the expansive infrastructure development work that is going on in Sierra Leone in terms of providing space for secondary education, and some effort being made to improve the infrastructure for tertiary education also in Sierra Leone. I'm personally aware of all those efforts. But I want to know the extent to which the focus is on technical and vocational education to provide skills and make our youth, self-employed in the various trades and vocations. Otherwise, Right Honorable Speaker, I want to commend the delegation from Sierra Leone, the government and the people of Sierra Leone for the immense improvements that we see on an annual basis since they are returned to stable democratic rule.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Member. I just want Honorable members to know that the Honorable Speaker is also a member of the Sierra Leone delegation. So sometimes I may want to interject. Is that, Jibo, is that a point of order? Or is putting your name on the list? Okay, Jibo.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much indeed, Right Honorable Speaker. Right Honorable Speaker, I want to add my voice to all previous speakers to congratulate your delegation, and this for the comprehensiveness of your report. This, as far as the various issues you address are concerned. Right Honorable Speaker, I have a few questions I want to put to the delegation. In particular on page 3, as far as the security situation is concerned. I note that there is a contradiction to talk about a crime rate which is relatively low crime rate, and the second paragraph you talk about there is an increase with increased criminality and other antisocial behaviors. For me, there is a contradiction. In one case, you're talking about a low crime rate, and then we have antisocial behaviors on the rise. Another thing, you talk about non-Sierra Leonean fisher folk invading the country. What are the nationalities of those invading Sierra Leone? Are they from the community or are they from outside the community? Because if they're part of the community, my view is that there may be some kind of gentleman's agreement between fisher folk of the community. On page 5 of your report, you talk about a court that started sitting in January 2021 called NASIT. My understanding is that you do not have a social security system in Sierra Leone, and therefore this is just a system that has been put in place in Sierra Leone, and its main mission has to do with retired pensioners and not for health insurance cover. With respect to COVID, you adopted measures, and this to avoid as much as possible the COVID and its spread. But you do state that the first case was on the 31st of March 2020, but generally it was towards the 14th of March 2020. So you were caught up in it at about the same time with everybody else. But I want to congratulate you for stemming the spread of the pandemic and for keeping it at bay. On page 8, evaluation of the real sector, you stated that the mining sector is supposed to be the engine of growth in 2021 because of normalcy in production within the existing mines. Not only that, but also because of improvement of prices of those commodities. The improvement is supposed to be sustained by an increase in public investment. So that's not reliable. The factors that you're talking about, you cannot have control over them. And if your budget is drawn on that basis, there will be a risk. Budget deficit will be staring you in the face. Inflation now. Your country has recorded very high inflation rates, and my understanding, reading through your report, is that you have a monetary policy, and you do demonstrate this. You demonstrated this in the presentation further down in your report. You have excessive currency, because when you read the report, you see that currency is your problem, and there is no investment alongside that which should support your currency. So that is the reason why government should be able to make some interventions, and this to ensure as much investment as possible take place.
Vous dites à la fin de votre exposé,
At the end of your report, and when it comes to budget deficit, and more specifically on page 9, you do state that in the period under review, budget deficit funded by domestic resources, and I really congratulate you if you have domestic resources to fund your budget deficit. And at the end of your report, you state that you would be able to control a deficit and bring it down to 2%. And I duck my hat to you. I want to congratulate you for that. There was another issue about women's empowerment. I think I'm a little lost here, so let me rest my case. I thank you, Right Honourable Speaker.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Honourable Member. As I said earlier, I'm also a member of the Sierra Leone delegation. So is that Gabriela? Huh? Gabriela, please, go ahead.
Sim, muito obrigada, Sr. Presidente. Eu gostaria de intervir na página 2. Sr. Presidente, foi apresentado...
Thank you, Right Honourable Speaker. We talked about a law. You talked about a law which is supposed to promote women's participation in electoral processes, 30% for elected positions. I just wanted to know if that law has been passed, that bill has been passed into law. Is there enforcement? We also saw the example of the Gambia. There, women are part of development and democracy, and what we observe is that the rate of women in terms of participation is pretty high in the Gambia. It is not just about their presence in political appointments, but also in elected positions. So women should be with their brothers and their partners, their husbands, whether we're talking about elective positions or appointments. I thank you, Right Honorable Speaker.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sure we don't have any more interventions. We have? Honorable Snow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me also join other speakers to congratulate Sierra Leone for this elaborate report. In your report, you stated some of the economic challenges being faced, and you also talk about your preparation for election. I've read your election guidelines or your election act, which says that in winning the presidential election in Sierra Leone, the candidate needs to obtain 55% of the vote in the first round. Is there any rationale? Because, for example, Gambia, you can win with 10%, simple majority, you can become president. In most other democracies, 50% plus one. But you have extended the bar, you have made the bar so high in Sierra Leone that you have to obtain 55% in becoming president. Is there any rationale behind that that we can learn from? Thank you.
Honorable Seno.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much indeed, Right Honorable Speaker. I also wish to add my voice to previous speakers, MPs, to congratulate the Sierra Leonean delegation and this for the quality and the very comprehensive nature of their report. I nonetheless have a few concerns, and the first one has to do with the law governing student loans. In the report, there is such a thing, and I would like to know what the mechanism is. My second concern has to do with vaccination. I'd like to know the population that has been vaccinated in Sierra Leone as of today. On page 15 now, it is stated in the report that the Leon has remained relatively stable, but there is some clarification provided about depreciation. So I'd like to know what the factors are, both endogenous and exogenous factors, as far as the depreciation goes. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more intervention? Finish. Finish? Okay, I'm sure the delegation is out there. Honorable Sama is there. I can see Honorable Sama, I can see Honorable Mali Spain, and I can see Honorable Sidi Tunis. So maybe with the permission from my colleagues, maybe, like I said, I'm also a member of the delegation, so I should also be given the opportunity to respond. And I will start with the census. Honorable Saraduko brought up the issue of census. I just want to inform honorable colleagues here that our laws in Sierra Leone give His Excellency the President to call for census midway. Well, in this particular case, we had our census in 2015, but then the data is that yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, sorry, but I think under our standing rules, the presiding cannot take part in the debate. So if you so desire to defend Sierra Leone, maybe you can come on the floor and one of the Speaker of the House is all presiding. Oh, okay.
Honorable Tunis, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I want to just make a few comments on the census. We had our census in 2015, and then, well, from the data collected at that time, it was very, very clear that so many things were left out. And our donor, the whole donor community, in fact, had to come out to encourage government to do this midterm census. And it's a census, like I said, the law provides for it, and it's supported by the majority of Sierra Leoneans. Yes, we have had issues where some opposition parties have objected to it, but generally, even the opposition parties generally support the issue of the midterm census. And I'm very, very pleased to inform honorable members that His Excellency the President and the First Family were actually counted yesterday. And I'm hoping that I will also be in Freetown as soon as possible to be counted. So it's a very, very popular move in Sierra Leone. And we are hoping that with this particular midterm census, we'll have the requisite data for any development plans. Because as we all know, there is no way any government can plan anywhere without the correct data. And that is exactly what the government is trying to do. That is what we have on the census. I also want to assure Honorable Saradugo that we have the same IG, the Inspector General of Police, IGP, and I can assure you that he's a very positive guy, very, very strong. He knows the law, and he's been doing extremely well to bring law and order in Sierra Leone. On the issue of whether, in fact, the lower inflation is creating any positive impact on the people, Honorable Numo wanted to find out whether this was creating any positive impact. We have to understand that COVID-19 has created so much problem across the globe. I remember listening to President Biden just a few days ago, and he was saying that even though the inflation rate was down, even though the economy had actually picked up, but it has still not been felt in the pockets of families. So it's the same kind of situations we have in West Africa, or generally across the globe. Why economies have grown, why we have had a situation where inflation rates have reduced tremendously, but it takes time to have the effect in the pockets of families. And to Honorable Ayariga, like I said, I'm just giving my own, the delegation I'm sure will also come into. On youth unemployment that you are very concerned about, government has introduced what we call youth farming. Every chiefdom in Sierra Leone has been provided with a tractor by government for the youth, and they have had youth farms everywhere across the country. So that is one way government is trying to get the youths occupied or engaged. And we also have a situation where government is encouraging large-scale mining companies to operate. The government is giving them a lot of concessions. For example, we have one right now in the north of the country that just started a few months ago, but have actually employed over 2,000 Sierra Leoneans. So, and mostly youths. So we are hoping that other companies will emulate that and our people will be employed. On the issue of the 21% of our our budget going to the education sector. Yes, that is correct. And government is very, very determined, even with the disbursement, because sometimes you can allocate, but you don't disburse. I can assure this honorable House that a lot of disbursement has taken place into the education sector. And now the focus is exactly what we are talking about, technical and vocational institutions. Government is trying to ensure that we have technical and vocational institutions in every district across the country. Because so instead of people leaving their districts, maybe moving to urban centers, these facilities will now be created by government for them to stay in their respective communities. Honorable Jibo, NASIT really, what we are talking about, NASIT, NASIT, the meaning of NASIT is National Social Security Insurance Trust. It's a social security outfit, and it's been doing extremely well, not only for pensioners, but for the development of the country. They have been very much involved in investments in key areas in the country, and they have also been able to create jobs and support our GDP. On the issue of the index case, I'm sure records show that Sierra Leone was the last country in ECOWAS that was affected by COVID-19. The last country. So in this case that they are referring to, the meaning more or less, or what the report is trying to say, was that why other countries in the sub-region had COVID-19 already, Sierra Leone did not have, and we were the last in the sub-region to have it. On comparing the security situation with the illegal drugs, which also creates its own issues. Security situation generally is very, very stable in Sierra Leone. Very, very stable. I'm sure people, honorable colleagues who went to Freetown in January can attest to the fact that you can actually leave your hotel at midnight and walk around the beach, and nobody, I repeat, will disturb you or create any problems for you. So generally, the security situation is very good. But then, the issue of illegal drugs, as you know, is not just in Sierra Leone. It's a menace across the region. And it's a menace that even the ECOWAS Commission is working on and to give support to countries across the region to ensure that this menace is getting rid of. So there is a little bit of difference between the general security situation in the country and this particular aspect. But like Honorable Ayariga was saying, it all boils down to youth unemployment, which is what government is focusing on right now to ensure that we have our youths employed. On the issue of the gender bill, we have that bill in Parliament right now. I've been out of Sierra Leone Parliament for a very long time, so I will not be able to say much about that. I'm sure Honorable Sama or Honorable Mali Spain will definitely talk about that. So those are just a few remarks I wanted to make. And for the 55% threshold, it's a very difficult one, but that is what the framers of our Constitution said, that for you to become president in our country, the first round, you have to have 55% support across the board. Now, with the constitutional review, there has been a lot of argument about changing that from 55% to 50+1. So it's very, very possible that during the next sittings of the Constitutional Review Committee, I'm sure the issue of the 55% threshold will be brought to the fore. I thank you very much, honorable members. I'm sure Honorable Sama or Honorable Malispain, they can decide on all issues. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam.
Merci, honorable.
Thank you, Right Honourable Speaker. Would the other members of the delegation wish to speak to the issues? You have the floor.
Speaker, my leader, Honorable Tunis, has said most of the things I wanted to say, but I will add my voice. There was a question from a sister about gender empowerment. Has the bill been passed? The answer is no, the bill has not been passed. But the good news is most MPs are agreed that we need to increase female participation in politics. And the bill is not only about politics, it's about ensuring that at least 30% of all elective and appointed positions are held by women. We agree on that. Maybe what we are discussing is how can this be achieved. The bill talks about safe seats for women that will be rotational, where only female candidates will contest. Some people are saying this will disadvantage the men. Some are saying let us use the Uganda model where every district will elect a woman and both men and women can run for the other seat. So there is a debate, but we have made a lot of progress. Recently, the president also appointed and Parliament approved a new electoral commissioner for the West. That is in line with his promise of empowering the women. So we have a commissioner that is a woman, which is good. Then an honorable member said, what impact have our economic gains had on livelihoods of Sierra Leoneans? I must say here that we have seen a lot of improvement in education. There has been increased enrollment in both primary and secondary schools. And according to recent figures, we've had more passes in public exams than before. Somebody also spoke about job creation. What modalities are being put in place to ensure that jobs are created for the youth? I have to say here that government has established some positive investment climate that is attracting a lot of investors. This has created jobs for a lot of people. Recently, we passed a bill that will provide loans for students. This bill is meant to increase enrollment in tertiary institutions. So we hope that this will have more youths leaving the streets and entering tertiary education. There was also honorable member said there was a contradiction. We mentioned low crime rate, and we also said that criminality is increasing. Yes, when we say low crime rate, we are comparing to the situation in other states in our region. A crime rate can be low, but increasing. When compared to other countries, the crime rate is lower in Sierra Leone. But we have noticed from recent statistics that it is increasing. It can be increasing, but still low. That's my answer to that. Yes, there was a question about social security. Yes, Mr. Speaker spoke about NACIT. NACIT provides social security. And that has caused a lot of improvement in the lives of retirees. Before this time, only government was responsible for pension. It created a lot of problems. About health security, we have insurance companies, the private sector that is largely involved in health security. I'm sure in the near future, government will also increase its intervention in this area. Then about 55%. The speaker has spoken about that. Fortunately, we are in the process of reviewing our constitution. I'm sure the framers of that constitution wanted some rare majority to be achieved for anybody who should climb to the seat of the presidency. The intention probably was to avoid marginal majority where somebody may just get 51% and is declared the winner. That would mean about 49% of the population rejected you at the polls. 49% is significant. But considering what is happening in other countries, I'm sure the constitutional review will also look at this percentage. Then I must add here that somebody asked, what has been the impact of what seems to be a lot of improvement in the economy? I must again add here that the present government has been completing projects that were left behind by the previous regime, like in terms of construction of roads, payment of debt, etc., etc. I will stop here to allow other members, if possible, to intervene. Thank you very much. And maybe, finally, I want to inform this House that about 868,000, over 868,000 doses of COVID vaccine have been administered to Sierra Leoneans. Considering the situation in other countries, I think this is good. It is significant. I will stop here to allow other members to intervene. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. I'm sure the delegation have adequately responded to all the questions asked. Honorable members, I submit the report to you for adoption. Report is adopted. Honorable members, the agenda for today's plenary sitting is exhausted. In line with the work program of this ordinary session, committee meetings resume today. In keeping with Article 7 of the Supplementary Act relating to the enhancement of the powers of the ECOWAS Parliament, and by virtue of Rule 32 of our Rules of Procedure, the Committee on Political Affairs, Peace and Security begins its meeting this afternoon. The agenda of the said meeting is a consideration of the political and security situation in our sub-region, particularly in Mali and Guinea. I hereby invite you to be diligent to enable us with fruitful deliberations. Oh, I think we have very good news here. Honorable members, Burkina Faso is celebrating their 61st anniversary of independence today. The date of independence normally is 5th August, but the celebration is today. So can we please give them a round of applause, please? Congratulations. The next plenary sitting will take place on Monday, 13 December 2022 at 10 a.m. The sitting is adjourned. Is it? What's it? Monday, 13th December 2021 is what you wrote. 2021.
We're not there yet. We are not there.